We're live. Are we live?
We're live.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
So as you can see, we are not in Buchanan E at UBC because UBC is closed today because it's a snow day, which means something very different in Vancouver than it means to the rest of the world. But yes, we got a few centimeters and it's brought the city to a standstill. So Andrew's at home and I'm at home. And we're with you. And we are so happy to dive right into week 5 and talk about looking at feedback. We, again, like last week, we have pages and pages and pages of your questions and comments, and all of it is wonderful. And we're going to go at breakneck speed and try and make sure that we catch everybody. So go ahead, Andrew.
You want me to start reading?
Sorry?
All right.
Andrew, you are glitching a little bit for me.
I can see you fine, and I think I'm okay. So can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can now.
Okay. Well, why don't I read a little bit, and then
sure. Take it away.
Well, this week we looked at feedback.
Yes.
So how to get it, how to work with it, how to find mentors in kindred spirits, and create a community of peers to help you on the journey ahead. All you need to do is look at the acknowledgement section of a book you admire, and you'll notice that very few writers have written a book without thanking anyone at all. It's very common that writers have a whole crew of people that they've shown the book to and done research with and gotten feedback from. So we asked people to share some of their best and worst feedback experiences in the discussion, and you did not disappoint. Annabelle, do you want to take the first one?
Yeah, excuse me, I'll jump right in. So Spirit Writer talked about a range of experiences. They say, I've had a full range of experiences from uplifting to helpful to soul crushing. Prior to this experience, I had, in fact, tried to research a publisher or agent who might be interested in a spiritual quest story, but I had no success. Then the gods of Facebook sent me notice of this editing course. I cannot describe my feeling of relief, or my relief in finding out that I was not crazy to hold my short stories back from an editor. As I said above, I was following a strong intuition that I had a lot of work to do before that transaction could take place. Now I know where I am in the drafting process. I have work set out. It will be difficult, but I am committed. Good work, Spirit Writer. It's really great to see that you're getting a very pragmatic and a very clear-eyed view of exactly where you are in that continuum from germ of the idea to actually approaching a publisher. That's great.
Okay, and I'll read the next one. So Jacqueline wrote a story about mentorship that was definitely unhelpful, though it sounds like maybe it wasn't entirely unhelpful. Jacqueline approached an English professor who was a published author, had wild dreams about him being impressed by the writing, so much so that he'd offered to become my writing mentor, like Sean Connery in Finding Forrester. But when she gave him the story, he gave her a long list of things that didn't work. The plot wasn't working, the dialogue was stilted, the characters were cliched. Worse, I was so desperate to find something he liked that I outright asked him if there was anything that was working in the story. He paused, thought hard about it, and then said, I had a good grasp of language. It was the pause that broke me. Yes. At the same time, although it took her a year to try writing again, this experience, she writes, helped me develop professional distance when listening to feedback about my writing. I've since attended a few writing workshops for my stories. While it never gets easy hearing about things that need work, I can at least distance myself enough to evaluate objectively the feedback I receive. And I think that's a really good point.
It is a great point. I do want to say it points to as well the importance of choosing your readers very wisely. This particular reader clearly doesn't know or didn't know how to give helpful feedback, even though they were a published author. They hadn't thought in advance about how to do that. As an instructor and as a sort of fellow writer, when I'm working with other writers, I think it's foundational to include what is working, because that's the baby that you don't want to throw out with the bathwater, right? So you really have to seek out someone for whom mentorship is something that they've really cultivated and made a part of their practice. And so look for a writer in residence at working at a library, or, look for a creative writing prof, or look for somebody who's already a member of a writing group. You want to find someone who's going to know how to speak to you helpfully about your work. Should we carry on?
Yes. So we heard some other, I'm just going to quickly paraphrase.
Yeah.
we heard from some other people. People talked about sometimes getting personal attacks or critiques of the subject matter rather than the writing itself.
That's tough, yeah.
Condescension, people not interested in helping them improve their work, readers who only read a few pages of the piece. Those often shut people down, took the wind out of their sails, and discouraged them, which is not good.
No, it's not good.
All writing feedback should leave the writer wanting to continue writing, not wanting to stop writing.
That's right. That's right.
If you ever ask for feedback yourself, definitely keep that in mind. You're trying, and this is also a great way to evaluate a writing group. Is everyone in the writing group focused on keeping everyone writing and continuing their journeys? Several people also talked about the pain and promise of sharing writing with family members. And I can remember this, the first person I ever shared writing with was my father, and he would always take a pencil out and start correcting the manuscript in front of me, and it made me squirm. But at the same time, it did thicken my skin over time.
My dad, I can probably best that one. My dad was a journalist and a newspaper editor, and he started that process with me, the correcting in front of me, when I was about 9 years old. So my skin thickened up pretty damn quick. And he would also, usefully though, at that age, he would also take books off the shelf and sort of open it up and say, look at this sentence, look at what the writer's doing here, look how he achieves this effect. So in fact, I feel that I was really fortunate. I know that I had good fortune that many others who aspire to be writers didn't have. But yeah, it's tough to, family members are particularly tough because they know all your weaknesses. They know how to get at you if they want to. They might feel that they're at risk when you're writing because they think that you're going to write about them or expose them. So it really is a can of worms and has to be approached with a lot of delicacy.
Yeah, I think that you should definitely pay attention to the relationships in your family and decide whether you want to go down that road. Sometimes people go there because it's the first person they think of, family or close, but yeah, there's so many pre-existing relationships where they're not necessarily the same things with a critique group or a writer that you meet through a class.
That's right. Steph, do you want to read that one?
Sure. So getting to the positive now, Steph wrote about getting the pleasure of getting feedback from writers in residencies and at retreats, as well as in the community where I live. Feedback has always been very helpful, but difficult to obtain for novel-length work. Yes, and that's something that's very, very common if you're taking a short-term residency, even a writing course. It's very hard to critique anything more than a short story because people just don't have the time. I've yet to find a group of like-minded people at a similar stage in their careers. I once asked to join a group which consisted of writers I'd met on courses, but I was shut down because they were published and I was not. On the other hand, I joined a group of writers in my local community who were mostly very inexperienced, whereas I have a BA in creative writing. I received very little in terms of constructive feedback from them. So that sounds like a Goldilocks problem.
Yeah, Steph is really highlighting the importance of finding a group of people who are at a roughly similar stage to you. This is not Montessori kindergarten where we can blend the sort of levels quite easily. With writing, you want to be with people who are going to challenge you a little bit, not too much, and definitely be able to give you feedback, which is sort of at the level that you're able to give feedback at as well. That's where it's all going to be the most helpful to you. So that was a very astute comment from Steph. Margaret spoke about the value of a small writing group. I've been lucky with feedback. I met 2 women in an online writing course last year, and the 3 of us formed an online writing group. We're in touch with each other daily and have shared our first drafts with each other as we completed a chapter, and the feedback has been gentle, instructive, and has helped reinforce lessons learned in these courses and greatly improved my writing. I made the mistake once of sharing my first chapter with a friend, and the feedback wasn't enthusiastic and did set me back for a while. So I can see the error in sharing material too soon. That's a great comment from Margaret. It's lovely that you found that group of supportive people. And yeah, we love our friends, we love our spouses, we love our families, but they're not always the best people to show raw work to. You want somebody who's going to understand the challenges, and other writers are often the best place to go first.
So writer resource.
Yeah, do you want to read that one, Andrew?
Yeah, we'll just skim through this very quickly. We asked people to suggest some writing resources, and you can look through the discussion to see what people actually said. We've got mentorships, teachers, writing meetups, master classes, writers federations, There's also a Facebook group started by an edX alumni, Mia Clapton, mentioned in her post in the Hangout questions. This is something that and I'll mention this a couple of times, but this is something that our students often do, which is they create a Facebook group for that class. Now, I am actually looking into the possibility of creating some sort of an online area for everyone who's ever taken our courses, and we will let people know if and when that comes to fruition. I just have to figure out the technology and the money, but it looks like there's something hopefully brewing a little bit later this spring. But Facebook, in the meantime, is a good place because you know that you are at least connecting with other writers and people who are also working on novels, which is important. So we should head to the Hangout questions, I believe.
We should. Let's zip right into them, starting with Caroline. Too cliche or not too cliche? And this is a leftover question that we must have gotten to last week. So Caroline says, I must admit I already did away with most of the cliches in this current rough draft. Reading my manuscript out loud and coming across them made me tense up and shiver when I encountered them. I blasted them out of the pages right away into the netherworld and successfully forgot about them. I want one of those blasters. I love it. One of the easiest traps I do fall into, though, is using the words amazing, fantastic, terrific way too often. There are so many more definitive and vivid words to use in their place, but as I madly write my thoughts down, I find I sneak their boring versions in way too easily. I just want to pause there and say, when you're in the heat of writing that first draft, don't criticize yourself for that. You're going to reach for what's handy, and you can go back in a subsequent draft, and it sounds like you're already aware of your personal sort of weaknesses, and you can go back and correct those. Think of them, it's not a negative. Think of them as positives. You find a cliche, you say, aha, this is an opportunity for me to do something more interesting with it. And so it's a little doorway, it's a little space where you can walk through it to something new. So don't be hard on yourself with those first draft cliches. We all do them, and it's just part of the process. It's not worth beating yourself up about. Now, Caroline does go on, if I did have to pick a cliche, it would actually be a character cliche. She talks about using twins, the good twin and the bad twin. She talks about having a story about a spoiled rich kid who gets into trouble one too many times, and daddy is tired of bailing him out every time. And then Caroline goes on to say, I've pulled some students I work with in high school. It's about 50-50 which one they like better. Do I stick with the cliche character or expand my imagination? I have to say, if you ask your students to give you feedback about your writing, they're not going to tell you what you want to hear. Sadly, I wish they would, but remember, you're grading them. So it's a bit of a conflict of interest for them to say, nah, that's a terrible idea. So I wouldn't necessarily go by polling students in your class. I look at character cliche as being, when is it archetype? When is it stereotype? Cliche is it's all in the execution, right? So it seems to be that twin stories are almost archetypal. We get them right from Shakespeare on down to the present. And it's how you execute it. It's whether you're bringing something new to the form. And similarly with the spoiled rich kid, this is, a story as old as the hills. And, are you creating a character who's two-dimensional? The spoiled rich kid is pure evil until he has a sentimental sort of reckoning and coming of age and suddenly turns into this wonderful good character. Well, that's a stereotype, right? Or it's a caricature, it's not a character. But are you investing this character with a lot of good and bad qualities, a lot of nuance, a lot of richness, and a lot of sort of hard-won experience through the course of the many plots and subplots and challenges and plot spikes throughout your novel? Then, it may well be a story that we've seen before, but I don't think it necessarily is a cliche anymore. So it's all in how you execute it.
Exactly.
And I realize I'm sitting on my bed with my laptop on my lap, and I keep thumping my fist, and that's why the screen is jiggling. I'm going to try and stop doing that. I'm a hand talker.
You're enthusiastic, which is great.
I am.
Okay, I'm going to go on to Night Owl's
Yes.
question. So Night Owl had more than one question, so we'll start with the first one. Quick clarification on elements. Under manuscript critique questions for beta readers, we say, what are the 3 strongest elements in the novel? What 3 elements of the novel could still use some work? So Night Owl asks, how do we describe elements to non-writers who are reading the book so they have a clue as to what we're looking for? Are we talking plot, setting, character, conflict, point of view, symbol, theme, or something else?
Yeah, well, first of all, the big caveat on giving your early drafts of your work to non-writing readers, because they may not be the ideal audience for you, specifically because you want to be talking in terms of craft elements. And so that's where a writer giving you feedback, even a novice or apprentice writer, is going to have a vocabulary that the lay reader, that the, what does Nancy call them? The civilians?
Civilians, yes.
That the civilians will not. So yes, we are talking about plot, setting, character, all of those sorts of craft things. And ideally, the most craft specific feedback that you can get, the better. If you are determined that you're going to show your work to, maybe you know someone who's reads really widely and know they're not a writer themselves, but they have a good grasp of sort of writing vocabulary, and you feel that they can give you some good feedback, you might want to offer them a little bit of guidance. Say, I'm looking to hear you tell me what you think about, and then name off whichever craft areas you're particularly feeling particularly challenged by or worried about or whatever. But yes, that's exactly what we're talking about, craft. And then...
Actually, I wanted to add something really quickly.
Yes, please.
I had chatted with a writer on Twitter recently about this. Let me just see if I can find the thing. Here we go. Who says he asks beta readers, so these are people who are not writers, questions like, after 50 pages, did you want to continue? Where were you bored? Did you understand the story? Would you buy this book? What 3 things work best? What 3 things didn't work in the story? So they're asking questions that a reader will be able to answer, someone who's an active reader, but does not require the writing vocabulary, which I thought was very useful.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of approaching it as well. But again, you're shaping the feedback that you're hoping to get. You're not just throwing it to them wide open. You're saying, I need these specifics, and then you sort of tailor that as closely as you can.
All right.
And then the second part of... Have I mixed up? Oh, no, I haven't. Second part of Night Owl's question was how to be in a writer's critique group and not share. So Night Owl is saying, I'm very protective of my work, don't want to show it, don't like to show it or talk about details to anyone. I'm wary of joining a critique group as there is an unspoken pressure to be providing stuff for people to read. And the concern is that this can get destructive really fast. I don't know if this is to allay the OMG, this new person is just here to steal my novel fears of the other group members, or whether they feel that it's just not right to take advantage of you by having you read their work, but you never bring yours because you feel that it's not ready. Night Owl says, I would, however, be thrilled to read and comment on other members' works. I feel like I'd be the perfect member of a critique group, but I know it doesn't work this way. I'm hesitant to start looking for one. Because I don't want to get kicked out or feel that I have to withdraw because I'm not at a place where I'm ready to share my own work yet.
So
should we stop there and sort of talk that one through?
Let's quickly jump into that, and then there's a second part. So the first part I would say is you don't have to join a critique group if you don't think you're ready to be critiqued. I mean, why would you join one if you don't want to be critiqued? If you want to get practice reading other people's stuff and giving them criticism, I'm pretty sure there are some people there that would be happy to get feedback without having to read your work. I don't think every group necessarily puts pressure on every member to give stuff all the time. At the same time, of course, if you are joining a group of people who want to share their writing, there is an expectation that you will be at some point sharing your writing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all a question of managing expectations and being really upfront if and when you join a group saying, look, this is where I'm at. I'm working on a novel. I don't want to show it to anybody yet. But, you know, I'm really interested in honing my critical skills by applying them to your work. I want to be a great reader. You know, would you be willing to have me on those terms? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Sorry, my husband just came and left, and I think it was some hand gestures about walking the dog, but I'm not sure. Snow day, man. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, so long as, I say, as you're really upfront about what you're willing and able to provide. That fear of stealing other people's ideas, I mean, that comes up in the comments that we've had a couple of times this week, that either they'll think you're there to steal their ideas, or you're worried about sharing your work because you don't want them to steal your ideas. I think that that's a bit of a sort of creative writing bugbear that's not as much of a problem as people think it is. It takes a long time to write a novel. And if you hear somebody describe their novel in a couple of sentences and you say, hey, I'm going to take that and spin it out and I'm going to write my novel out of this. Well, you know, the novel that you write and the novel that the person whose idea it was writes, they're going to be so different anyway. They're not, it's not, I don't know. I don't see that when we're talking about the novel. It's really hard to see that as a driving concern. Andrew, do you want to weigh in there? I mean, if somebody has a premise that they feel, I guess if we're looking at like Speclit or something, where they have a premise that they feel is really modern and new, I don't know, would it be more of a concern there?
I tend to agree with you in that the execution is everything, and there's no truly new ideas out there. A lot of people, when they have a great idea, they get very protective of it because they think somehow that getting it out there might spoil the idea. There are high concept science fiction or genre stories that rely very much on the concept, but most of the working writers I know, this isn't something they worry about. It tends to be something that people who are still getting started, and like you said, they haven't maybe necessarily realized how much of it is the years or 2 or 3 or whatever that you put.
Oh, Andrew, Andrew, you're glitching for me. I don't know if you are for the viewers.
I hope not. I'm looking at the stream on my other screen and it looks okay. So I think we'll just continue and just hope that everything's fine. Okay. Now, let's quickly, I wanted to quickly deal with your second question, and then we have 2 questions from the
yes.
chat.
Yeah. So the second question, why don't I read it out and you can take a stab if you like. The second question is, I'm wondering if a possible workaround is to write short stories that supplement your novel, where you explore a character or a reflective moment or a background piece to the novel, knowing that it's not intended to be included. That last bit is very important. If you don't get attached to it, you could try out a lot of techniques, voice, POV, character development, symbolism, without getting hobbled by the critiques you receive, because there is still a glass wall between your side pieces and the novel itself. You might stumble on something to include, but it also can be easily discarded if it doesn't work. Do you want me to answer that, or do you want to jump in?
I'll tell you what I think. I would be reluctant to do this because all the time you spend writing something that isn't your actual novel isn't time that you're spending writing your novel. If you don't want to write short stories, then I don't think you should be writing them just to have something to submit to a group. Because again, you're also not getting critique on the novel, which is the thing you really want to get critique on. Yeah. So I mean, you don't.
There's sort of a glass half full, glass half empty here, though, because I mean, there's also a part of me wants to say that's not what a short story is, where you're just exploring a character or providing a moment or a bit of background. That's, you know, that's not what a short story is. Short stories have their own sort of internal mechanisms that you need to look at. What that is, though, and what could be really valuable is that could be some exploratory writing that you do that will, you know, say to yourself, that is going to end up in the novel. And you can share that with a group and say, hey, I'm playing around with these couple of options for point of view, like which one do you think is working better, so that you're not giving entire chapters even or great swaths of your novel, but you're sharing some craft ideas that you're playing with and getting some feedback on that. And again, it's a question of expectations. If they understand that you're joining this group not to be submitting a chapter a week, but to be able to show a few pages where you're focused on a particular aspect of craft, as long as they understand that when you go in, I think that your group will probably be welcoming. And then we had online questions.
Yeah, so let me read those quickly. So there's one with a follow-up. So Christofina asked, when attending a blue pencil session at a conference, what recommendations do you have regarding what work to choose and what questions to ask? And then Mike McGee echoed the question, when choosing what work to show a mentor, should we show our best work or the work that needs the most help? So they're related questions.
I think you show your best work. Because where a mentor is most valuable to you is not pointing out things that you already know you need to fix. They're showing you what you can't see, ideally. They're showing you the back of your head or the dark side of the moon or whatever you want to call it. They can point to, you know, you've got something as done as you can get it. And they say, and this is how you take it that next step. So I would always err on the side of providing something that is too finished and too polished.
Yeah, I agree. It's the same for a writing group too. I mean, you want your stuff to be as close as possible. You basically want to take it to the end of where you can take it. I think also for a blue pencil session at a conference, questions to ask, that might be a place where you take something where you've taken it as far as you can and you still know something's not quite right, but you don't know what isn't right, or you don't know how to fix And that might be a place where an expert could give you a quick set of tips.
That makes sense. Should we move on?
Yes.
Oh, and then a final little piece to that last question. As an extension question inspired by Jen Suk-Fong Lee's video on her writing group, it doesn't sound like they keep their first draft to themselves. She mentions always bringing work. Does she mean after the point of unveiling a manuscript in progress? I think Jen's group is a little bit unique because those ladies have known each other for, I think it's going on decades now. They've been together for a long, long, long time.
15 plus years easily.
So, and they're all published authors, and there's, I think, a very high degree of trust where they perhaps would be showing earlier drafts than you typically would. So I'm not sure if her writing group is typical in that regard.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we move on?
Yeah. Now there's a question about colored highlighters. We had suggested people look through their pages and highlight different parts of the writing. So dialogue, exposition, description, internal monologue, etc. And the question is how, basically the question boils down to how specific do you get when you're doing this? The writer, actually it's the same student, Night Owl, was getting a bit worried about getting the dialogue just right, and is something a narrative summary or not.
Yeah.
Maybe you're worrying a little too much about the details and not the larger picture, which is looking at, you know, how often certain characters are speaking, how much is dialogue, how much isn't dialogue.
Yeah, and then they wrap it up by saying, I realize the exercise is to get an idea of the distribution of the different literary elements, and it's probably not a deal breaker to be a bit off sometimes, but this has me in fits because the more precise the highlighting, the more apparent the flaws will be. In fact, I think I want to say, no, it's okay to be a little more casual about it. You know, you're getting very fine-grained with, when I call it dialogue, do I include the tags? I mean, you want an overall sense of the larger rhythms. And in fact, that very fine-grained kind of detail is not what we're after here. It's more a big picture thing that we're looking at. So, you know, am I writing a novel which has dialogue on every single page? Or am I writing a novel where the dialogue has completely fallen out of the novel for 50 pages? You know, you want to be seeing the big picture. We're not looking at a sort of micro edit with this color coding or text edit. This is something bigger than that. That's helping you pick out your, what's the expression I want to use, Andrew? Your sort of pet, you know,
well, basically habits, right?
Your defaults, the things that you fall into. Yeah. So in fact, I think the more fine-grained you go, it's not necessarily going to help you because this is an exercise about the big picture, not about the small.
Yeah.
Does that kind of make sense?
Makes sense to me. Hopefully it makes sense to our learner as well.
Okay.
Deborah had a question. Recently, I had witnessed a friend get feedback from writers that I thought took them away from their original intentions. And I wonder what advice you have regarding this, because we wrote in the class, feedback exists to help the writer move closer to their intention for the novel. Chevy Stephen also talked a little bit about this, saying you need a strong sense of self. You don't want to immediately agree with everything someone tells you.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that that's actually really crucial. Providing feedback has to be, for it to be useful, it has to be an act of generosity. It's not about imposing your own artistic preferences or artistic visions on someone else. If you have really strong feelings about what would be a successful project, go write that project yourself. But if somebody else has brought their work to you and is saying, you know, I'm struggling, how do I make this better? You have to kind of set your sort of personal preferences aside and in that act of generosity say, this isn't a book that I would write. I wouldn't do it in this way. But insofar as I can see what you're trying to do, I'm going to try and help you make it become more the thing that you want, not the thing that I want. So I think that's really key to offering feedback.
And then if you're receiving feedback and you're getting someone who isn't doing that, yeah. I think you need to, you know, once you've received the feedback, sit back, think to yourself, is this the sort of feedback, is this person on the right wavelength? Maybe they're not. Maybe you'd have to ignore all the feedback. Maybe there's something in there you can take out of it, but maybe it's just the wrong reader for you.
And it's always going to be a fine line, right? Because, you know, I think I mentioned this last time, that whenever I get feedback, my initial reaction is always, "You're crazy. What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And then after a little bit of time passes and I cool down, I'm usually able to say, "Oh, actually, I can see how I could incorporate this." So your initial knee-jerk reaction to any feedback is not the one that you should go with. But after that cool down time, if you're still going, "This is not the novel that I wanted to write," or "This is not the story I was intending," that's telling you something really important, I think.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, then we've got writer group time commitment. I was curious about Nancy's description of her writing group and the frequency of their meetings. Do they meet twice a month for approximately 4 hours per meeting? It seems like a large time commitment with writing and work and other life demands. Yes, my understanding of Nancy's group is that they do meet that often. Most, if not all of them, are professional writers of one sort or another, fiction, nonfiction, magazine, newspaper. Like, there's a range of what they do, but they are very committed to it. And again, they've been doing that for years and years and years. So I believe that they do meet that often, and they do give it that much priority in their lives. Yeah.
We just had a quick question online that I answered in text, but I'm going to repeat anyway. Would you go through someone else's work with the tools that you have given us? For example, the highlighting exercises, if you were giving them feedback. I replied, and you can correct me if you disagree with this, that I thought you could, but I thought that was maybe too fine-grained for giving feedback. Usually feedback is more general if you're not being paid to be an editor. When I give feedback to people, I might give 2 or 3 pages, and I would talk about more large-scale stuff than fine-grained stuff.
You can, although I would also suggest that, you know, if you happen to notice as you're reading through, wow, there's a lot of green here, if green is your dialogue color or whatever, you can point that out to them. You can also explain the technique to them and say, look, grab a bunch of colored highlighters and do this for yourself. Because frankly, I think it's going to be more valuable for the writer to be able to kind of own that skill set and take it on, do that work for themselves, than have someone else present it to them and then they look at it passively. It's always more educational for you to have to engage with your own work in that way. So I would certainly say, explain the technique to them if you think that they might find it useful.
Jacqueline was our next question asker.
Okay, where did we do reading aloud is a great tool? Oh, no, we're over here.
Yeah, that wasn't.
Yes, and then somebody just remarks that reading aloud is a great tool. Yes, it is. Jacqueline, do you want to read this one, Andrew?
I will.
Okay.
Jacqueline has 3 questions. Question 1, strategic scheduling of focused writing time. And this is something that all writers have to deal with. I work full time, and after a few weeks of balancing my day job with my revisions with this course, I'm starting to feel a bit burned out. I realize there's no easy solution to this, and writers deal with it all the time. But I also realize that for me to get my novel finished and ready to be published, I'll need to carve out some dedicated time to focus solely on writing and editing. So I'm planning on using vacation days. My question is, when in the editing process would you recommend it would be a good strategy to schedule this focused, dedicated time? And related to that, if I get to the point where I do get a publishing deal, what kind of timelines do editors usually give you to make edits?
All right, maybe I'll take that second one first, and then we can go back to Jacqueline's first question. There again, you want to be really all about managing expectations as you go into it. So when the contract's being drawn up, you have to be honest about what you feel is a reasonable time frame, and the editors will be honest about what they need from you. People miss deadlines in publishing, you know, frankly, a lot, and it's not usually a huge problem so long as you are communicating openly with the people that you're working with, and you really, there's no intent to deceive. You know, you're saying, honestly, I have a full-time job, I have kids, I have this, that, and the other all going on. I can't get this to you until 6 months from now. You know, as long as you're honest, you're probably going to be able to work something out. Now, in terms of going backwards and looking at that question about carving out your time, when should you devote the sort of the longer periods of time that you can get? There's a couple things that I want to say in response to that. Way back in our outlining course, in course 1, we do talk about finding usable time during your day, during your week, during your year. We talk about learning to adapt to the amount of time that you have available to you. So that might be something that's useful to look at. I do think that if you're always waiting for large interrupt, and I'm not suggesting this is you, Jacqueline, I'm saying more broadly, if you're always waiting for large interrupted time periods to get your writing done, you're never going to get your writing done. You have to learn to do everything that you need to do within smaller periods of time. Where you would best spend those precious sort of long days of writing that you're able to carve out is really going to depend so much on the nature of the novel that you're writing, how you work best as a writer. There's so many variables there. If you're doing a novel that requires you to travel to do some research, for instance, well, maybe you're going to have these days-long immersion in that work then. Maybe that's where you spend it. If you find that it's really hard for you to do a structural edit without being able to sort of immerse yourself so you can hold the architecture of the whole thing in your mind at once, maybe that's where you want to put the big time, is at the very beginning of your editing process, where you're looking at that macro stuff, assuming that you can pick off the micro stuff bit by bit. But it's really going to vary depending on your project and depending on who you are as a writer. I would say, alongside sort of analyzing that and figuring out where to spend those days, also spend some time figuring out how you can accomplish what you need to with the smaller periods of time that you have available to you. Because honestly, most writers don't have uninterrupted time. You just have to learn to deal with what you have. Yeah. Andrew, did you want to add anything there?
No, I mean, I completely agree. I am in the process of doing a revision of a novel right now, and my time is basically 3 90-minute slots during the week, in the morning, early in the morning when I'm commuting on the ferry to work, and then occasional weekends, and then I have time to read if I'm occasionally in the evening. But that's it right for me right now, and I am doing revision, and if I sell the book, I'm going to have to try and work in revisions on a similar schedule, because I have a full-time job, I have kids, I'm taking a course. I mean, everyone has busy lives, yeah, pretty much. So yeah, you just got to try and fit it in. But I managed to write a novel with 3 90-minute sessions a week, plus some extra time occasionally in the evenings. It is possible.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Moving on to a question about early readers. Oh, was there something online?
No, that's it. Okay. Question 2 is what I was going to say.
Yes, please. Do you want to read that one?
Yeah, so basically, Jacqueline's asking, what's usually considered fair compensation or forms of gratitude for early readers of the manuscript? We're basically asking someone to spend 8 to 12 hours reading a rough draft. I can think of some friends who give me feedback that they're expecting to be paid. I don't want to take advantage of anyone. I've often seen posts online by artists or arts workers who are frustrated because they're often asked by friends to provide professional level services for free. So Jacqueline has a couple of people in mind to ask for feedback. Avid reader and a main confidant throughout the first draft. One is a freelance editor, the other one works in publishing. I hesitate to take advantage of our friendship, but at the same time, I saw professional editing fees can run into the thousands for a full manuscript, and I can't afford that. Help.
Yeah, you raised some really good points, and I'm so glad that you're sensitive to the problems kind of inherent in asking an artist to do work for free, because it comes up often, to be honest. I will be really frank with you and say that with my last historical novel, I hired a historian of the period that I was writing about to read the novel through, not for the kind of craft things that we were talking about earlier. I wasn't really interested in what they thought of my characterizations, but for period detail, to make sure that I hadn't committed any major historical gaffes. I paid them $1,000 to do that. And it was valuable. I made some changes based on the feedback that they got, and it was really helpful to me. If I was approaching a sensitivity reader and saying, hey, I just have this one chapter that I need you to take a look at, it's going to take X amount of time, I might throw like $200 or something at it. I think the only people you would ask to work for free would be your family. Maybe not even then. Depends on your relationship with your family. But you know, and if you're just, for instance, let's say that you haven't done the writing yet, but you want to go interview somebody who's a specialist in a particular field, you want 15 minutes of their time to ask them some questions, I would definitely take them a really nice fancy coffee or some chocolate or a book or, you know, a token of appreciation of some sort. I would never, ever expect people to do that work for nothing.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. One thing I will say is that for the readers I have had so far for my work, I have worked on a reciprocity basis, so I have done something.
Oh, that's good.
Usually I find other writers and we make an agreement that I will read their beta stuff and they will read my beta stuff. And so like I just did one recently for someone I used to know from a few years ago who's writing in the same genre as me. They're writing a science fiction, a young adult book, and I read their manuscript and I gave them 4 pages of notes. I spent quite a few hours on it. And I know that when I have my manuscript ready to go again, I will send that to them. And I didn't have them until they approached me recently, and I was like, yes, I'll do it because I know that I need a reader down the road. So
that's a great way to go too.
That's useful, reciprocity. One way to think about it maybe is there something you can do for these people that doesn't necessarily involve giving them money if you don't have a lot of them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. We are up
Question 3.
Do you recommend hiring a professional editor before querying? I recently saw people on Twitter saying you don't need to because the agent or publisher will do the editing for you. Oh, people on Twitter. But I also seem to remember hearing somewhere else that it's very much recommended to get a professional edit before sending out your manuscript. What are your thoughts? What do you think of people on Twitter, Andrew?
The ones who aren't Russians or secret agents.
Yeah, but how would you know?
I don't know. Maybe the Russians are useful if you have a question about Russia.
There's some pretty good Russian novelists out there, I have to say.
Yeah. What I would say is I'm reluctant myself to hire a professional editor, partly because I just don't want to spend them. I know I've heard people talk about this. I've also heard people say, agents or publishers will do the editing for you. You have to have an agent or a publisher for that to happen. So keep that in mind because most of us don't at this point, especially when we're just trying to start out and get that book published. I mean, Chevy Stevens, for example, famously, she paid and worked with an editor for quite a while to get her work. She had never taken any writing courses. She didn't have a writing group. That was her essential immersion. If you can take courses like this, that's a way to do it maybe less expensively to get feedback. It's not the same as being edited. It's hard to say. I mean, like I said, I don't, but at the same time, I am working right now with an agent I know who's giving me modest amounts of feedback. It's only like, a few paragraphs, but it's something. Annabelle?
Yeah, I mean, your agent and your publisher are not your servants, and they're not going to do work for you that you could do for yourself. So that's the first thing. If we're talking about like a copy edit where, you know that your spelling is bad, but you can't be bothered to fix it, no, they're not going to do that for you. You have to think about what that means. When somebody says, well, my publisher will do the editing for me, they're not going to write your book for you. They're going to give you some suggestions for feedback, but it's on you to implement them. So, it's always bad to go in. It's a bad idea to go into a relationship with editor publisher assuming that you're downloading stuff to them. That's not how it works. It's a professional kind of back and forth. Do you need a professional edit before sending out your manuscript? Well, you have to think about what does that mean to me? What do I think I would be getting back from that? Is it that, I am a really bad speller and I need someone to help me with that? Okay, well, then there's ways you can go to do that. Is it I'm worried about the structure of my novel? And sorry, I'm having audio issues here. Is it that I'm worried about the structure of my novel and I really want somebody to provide me with that kind of structural feedback? Well, is some of that analysis something that you can teach yourself to do by taking a course like this, for instance? So I think you have to be really specific about what it is that you would be hoping to get back before you go out and spend money hiring somebody to do something for you. If you can't articulate what you're hoping them to provide you with, don't do it. That would be what I would say.
Okay, good answer. Okay, next.
I'm going to take these off. If it becomes a problem, Andrew, can you let me know?
I will.
Sorry, just my earphones are not working.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Let me know if it gets tinny or echoey or anything.
Okay. So Introvertica had a question about length. Yes. So her novel is now at 118,000 words, and every time she looked at it, it seems to grow some more.
Yep.
She says, in fact, I've been wondering if part of the reason I'm having so much trouble with the revision process is that I haven't truly finished the first draft, which means it could get much longer. I asked myself whether I had more than one novel here, so I could hack off the first half and work on it. The answer is unfortunately no. I believe that is not possible. So I don't know what to do, she says. Do you have any advice you can give me about handling an unintentionally big project? Should I just assume that it really needs to be ruthlessly cut somehow, and I guess at some point in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a little bit arbitrary. It sounds like that you've already gone in and done some of the work that you need to do in articulating to yourself, you know, can I cut this back? Can I cut a character? Can I cut a storyline? Am I able to sort of chunk it apart? And if you've already really rolled up your sleeves and dug in and done some serious sort of structural work with it and realized, no, this is actually a novel with a very big scope. I have 4 characters. I need them all because they're all contributing to telling one greater story. Then you're writing a big book, and that's okay. I think the biggest suggestion that I would have, 118,000 words, it's, you know, it's bigger. It's not the very biggest book I've ever seen. I think what you want to maybe start doing is reading other books that are of the length and of the scope and, you know, with the variety of characters of your book. It sounds as though that feels like something that's very much outside of your comfort zone. And so I wonder, Introvertica, if you're used to reading books like that. You do mention in your question that you're reading something that's significantly shorter than that. So I would suggest that you seek out, you know, it's Pynchon land from here on out for you. No, but I mean, I think you can seek out the sort of the Anne-Marie MacDonald, the Anne Michaels, the, you know, David Foster Wallace. You seek out those big novels of all different kinds of varieties and learn how those are sort of, get your mind speaking that language, if that makes sense. Get familiar with structurally, what does this entail? How are the POVs managed as we're moving from character to character? You'll absorb and learn so much from reading at that length. Again, though, I want to say, you may not be done your first draft, and it may have to get longer before it gets shorter again. And I think that's okay. You've got to get the whole thing out in front of you before you know what you're dealing with. And it sounds like you're still in that process of getting the whole thing out in front of you. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense.
I want to mention at this point, actually, that we've had a few people ask us if we can look at individual scenes that they're working on or individual chapters. And I want to jump in and sort of say, unfortunately, we cannot. And that is not because we're not interested in your work. It's not because we don't want to be able to go in and provide you that one-on-one feedback. It's simply a question of scale. If we did it for one person, we'd have to do it for everyone. And we just don't have the manpower to be able to, the human power, the girl power, to be able to do that. I wish we could, but we cannot offer to. But what I would suggest to you, because what I wanted to say following that is, I mean, how many people do we have in this course at the moment? Like, we're pushing 100, Andrew?
This course right now?
Yeah.
No, I think it's in the 60s.
We're in the 60s, okay. But I mean, in past, we've had, you know, iterations of the course where we'll have a couple hundred people in the course, and, you know, thousands of people have gone. I think at this point, that's safe to say, isn't it?
We're over 1,000, definitely. We're probably
well over 1,000 for all the people who've taken these courses. So it's just a matter of the math. We can't offer to be reading individual scenes. What I would encourage you to do, though, is, you know, because very often when people ask us to do that, they're saying, I just need to know if it's good. I just need to know if I should be doing this. And I think what you need to do is turn those questions around and kind of own them for yourself and say, you know, only you can answer that for yourself. So does this feel valuable for me? Do I come away from a writing period feeling that this was time well spent? But then also specifically in terms of the craft, okay, is this good? What does that mean to me? Do I have a character who's complex and who is facing conflict and who is having to be active and make decisions? Do I have a structure which is making some sense, where I can see rising action and climax and that kind of thing? You know, do I have a prose style that I've carefully chosen that is appropriate to the thing that I'm writing? And I've gone through and looked for cliches. You can answer those questions for yourself. You know, is this good? By breaking it down to those individual craft elements and saying, okay, have I done this? Have I done this? Have I done this? It's not easy work. It's hard work. It's detailed work. But you can learn to do that work, and you don't need to be going to other people for that validation then. But I think even more importantly, that emotional kind of, you know, is this good? Am I wasting my time? Should I be doing this? Nobody can answer that for you. And anybody who pretends they can answer that for you is not helping you. Only you can decide whether it's a worthwhile thing and you feel that you're spending your time well.
Well
Does that
said.
make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to Christine Elaine, who has a question about advice wanted for newbie writers with no published work. I noticed that a lot of retreats and residencies require that the writer be previously published. Is the complete absence of previously published work going to be a barrier for me in this context and others more generally? Should I stop work on my novel, poke a stick at the short stories I have lying around, and submit them for publication? Andrew, you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll give it a shot.
We kind of already talked about it a bit.
We have a bit. I mean, it really depends if you're trying to be a short story writer and a novelist. I mean, I write both, and I have published short stories. I've occasionally entered contests. I won some money last year in a flash fiction contest.
You never told me about that.
Well, you know.
Oh.
But and that was a 980 word story, so it didn't take me that long to write. So I mean, they can be great, and it is nice to have stuff on your resume for sure. If you're going to be contacting publishers or agents, and you say, I haven't written anything, but here's my novel, or you say, I have published X in X, Y, and Z, here's my novel, it doesn't hurt. At the same time, if they're not interested in your query, I mean, they will reject you anyway because they have lots. So it kind of depends on, do you want to also be writing these things? And there's a follow-up question from Trina, who also wrote, I've tried to write other work so I can pursue publication in magazines and online. There's a publisher I'd like to be connected with. They don't publish writers who are not previously published, but I don't write short stories. I only have so much time and I'm dedicated to what I do. So I think you kind of answered that. Would you agree?
Sorry, you just glitched on me again, Andrew.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, there we go. There we go. You're back.
Okay. Did you hear what I said from Trina's question?
You read Trina's question. Yeah. I think I get a little bit of a sense from the questions around short stories that people are viewing them almost as a stepping stone to something more. And the part of me that loves the short story form wants to say, we could teach a whole other sort of 3 suite of courses on writing a great short story. It's not an easy form. It's not a form that, you know, meaningfully necessarily teaches you a ton about how to write a novel. It's its own thing, as my kids like to say. It's very much an art form in and of itself. And I feel almost like people are stepping on the heads of the poor short stories, trying to reach up to something higher. And that's not what short stories are. So what am I trying to say exactly?
You're saying write short stories if you are a short story writer, or really
you're a short story writer and you're willing to give them that commitment. But if you approach a short story saying, this is going to get me to something else, that's like saying, well, I'm going to write a vampire novel, not because I'm interested in vampire novels, because it'll get me that first publication. And then I can write what I really want to write. You're not going to write a good vampire novel. If you're writing short stories in order to get a publisher's attention for your novel, you're not going to write a good short story. So, you know, no, I don't think that that's time well spent. If you love the short story form and if you're willing to give your all to that, and then you go out and publish those and then you move on to a novel, I think that's a different thing. But don't view them as a stepping stone, because they're not.
Yeah, and I'll follow up to that by saying that I have stopped writing short fiction right now. I spent some time in the last couple of years writing lots of short fiction, and I've stopped because I want to focus on the novel, and I only have so much time and attention in my life. And short stories, to do a short story well, takes a lot of time.
It does.
Even if it's doesn't take long to read, you know, you can spend months on a short story, and I want to spend that on my novel right now.
Yeah. Let's go on to Christine Elaine's second question, because this is really important, I think, for the course overall. For this applies beyond just this week. So Christine Elaine is asking about doing exercises versus writing. I have been finding the course incredibly helpful, yay, especially the suggestions for exercises to work on character development, narrative voice, and prose style. I'm finding I'm generating rich insights and ideas. However, I'm finding that I'm busy doing these things and not actually writing. By this, I mean that I'm behind in working on my actual manuscript because I'm doing all this quote unquote background work. There might not be an answer to this, but maybe you could provide pointers. How much is too much behind the scenes character development, prose style development, and so on? My worry, am I devolving into procrastination, or is what I'm doing recommended? I, for a long time, personally in my own writing practice, resisted doing exercises of any sort because I thought everything I do, I want to be towards the end of completing the larger project that's in my mind. I don't keep a journal. I used to get really resentful when I was at school when I was asked to do little throwaway exercises. And so what I've evolved towards and what I'm hoping these courses capture, and Nancy, I think, thinks very much the same way that I do, is that these are exercises that are not peripheral to your writing project. They are core. They're central to it. You're going to generate material. This is very much the idea, because this is, these are the only circumstances under which I personally would do writing exercises. I'm going to generate material out of this that will find its way into the novel. Every last scrap of it, no. For instance, filling in a character questionnaire, it's super unlikely that your character is going to be completing a questionnaire in your novel, right? But you're going to get material out of that is directly going to flow into your novel. So I'm hoping very much that you're not seeing these as being sort of off to the side. These exercises are meant to be central. They're meant to be incorporated, to get rolled into the work that you're doing. Andrew, do you want to kind of jump in there?
Yeah, I would agree with everything you said. And what I would add is, in a more general form, so we're not talking about the specific exercises here, but the idea of exercises in general as procrastination, is I think you need to think about, as a writer going forward, if you have an area you need to improve on, then it might make sense to spend some time doing an exercise or doing some work on character or dialogue or whatever. Again, with the idea that hopefully the stuff you produce can make it into your book. But if you don't have specific things you're trying to fix at the moment, then you shouldn't be spending too much time on this sort of thing.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. Yeah. And I think you'll know deep down when you're procrastinating and when you're actually, doing stuff that's useful to you, when you're just turning your wheels. And then the third part of that question is switching points of view and length of chapter/section. Sorry, I can't remember who was asking this question, but I just finished reading Etta and Otto and Russell and James by Emma Hooper, where a POV switch starts happening faster towards the end of the novel. Somebody was looking for a novel example like that. And so there it is. Hope this helps whoever it was. Thank you very much for that, Christine Elaine. I'm sure whoever it was will find that very helpful. Where are we at now? Margaret, questions about formatting. Thanks for guidelines on standard manuscript formatting. I have a couple of questions. Standard for indenting a paragraph. Standard. Oh yeah, sorry.
No, I'm just saying, I don't think it matters that much at the moment.
Nope. I would say no, as long as it's clear that it is a new paragraph. If there's any ambiguity in the reader's mind, like, is this, isn't this, you're not indenting enough, but some people don't indent the paragraphs. They'll just leave that extra space, and every paragraph is left justified. So as long as it's clear, the formatting doesn't matter so much. Personally, I would hit tab, but that's just me. I don't actually count the number of clicks with the space bar.
No. And the next part of this question is there a standard for showing inner thoughts when writing in third person limited? Now, this is something I think we've talked about in one of the other courses, maybe course 2. I think
we talked about this in course 2. Nancy and I are both not fans of the italics for the inside voice, if we can call it that, to show thoughts. They should be incorporated quite naturally into the flow of the writing. And if you're in a close third person, you should be able to get away with these without having to put them into italics. It'll be clear that it's something that the character is thinking. So the example that Margaret gives us is, back in the kitchen, he stuffed down a piece of toast and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Was Joe just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Joe being loud and blustery at pals, ranting about Davidson's crew killing the grizzly. Damn, I wish Jessica was here. And that I wish Jessica was here, we've been in the third person all the way up to there. So the idea is that's the little bit of sort of interior, that's the thought. And the question is, should it be italicized? I think the better way to do it would be, back in the kitchen, he stuffed down the piece of toast, blah, 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 blah. Damn, he wished Jessica were here. It's still understood as a thought. You're not gaining anything by jumping into the first person there, except you're potentially disorienting your reader a little bit. Keep it in third. Keep your letters slanted upright. Don't lean to the side. And yeah, just find a way to incorporate it. But if you're in a fairly close POV, a particularly close third POV, a lot of that's going to be implied anyway. We're going to understand that we're in the reader's head, that we are in the character's head. We're going to know whose head we're in. That's what I'm trying to say.
Definitely.
Okay.
I'll read the next question. Sharad has.
Hey, Sharad.
Pardon?
No, I said, hey, Sharad.
Oh, yes. Hey, Sharad. After many missteps and a very boring first draft, written almost like a formal biography, I may have stumbled upon a style which works much better for my story. My draft was a boring series of events written in the first person, interspersed with obviously contrived ways to add background information and facts. I found that by adding a second person point of view, so that's the you rather than the I to the story, a mentor, guide, and alter ego, I'm able to tell the same story with more depth and have started in rewriting in this way.
Cool.
In my rewrite, factual information regarding laws and established situations can now be part of conversations. So I have a long way ahead. I'm also concerned that you is not an actual person, and now I'm not sure how this would work in a nonfiction memoir, but I'm writing it that way for now. Would I have to make up a friend or make it based on the life of? Do you have any thoughts about when this could work?
You know what? I was not sure if this would work in a nonfiction memoir either, and I did me some Googling, and I came up with one called House of Prayer #2 by Mark Richard, which seems to be it's a memoir using a sort of shifting POV. It seems to start in a bit of a third and then it goes into the second person. So I would suggest that you find that one, Sharad, and do a bit of Googling for yourself and see if you can come up with some other examples of second person. I think one of the things that's really appealing about the second person is its sort of flexibility and its sort of embracing quality. You don't have to nail down who the you is. I strongly believe that. I think that can be limiting. If you're trying to impose a personality on the you, the reader's going to sit there going, well, that's not me, though. Don't tell me, because that's not me. So as you leave it vague, if you leave it open, you give yourself more room to play. So I would say, do you have to make up a friend? No, not unless you feel that that's, something that's necessary to the work itself. But if that's feeling artificial to you just because you happen to have chosen the second person, no, I don't think there's any obligation to do that. But I think it's really intriguing. The fact that there aren't many examples of this, to me, is appealing because it's sort of new territory that you can be working in and really kind of pushing at the boundaries of the form and seeing what can be done with second person in the context of a memoir. So I think it's really interesting. I'd say go on and, like I say, seek out examples. Mark Richard, House of Prayer #2, and do some more looking around, see what else you can find.
Interesting. Okay, Rob has a question. Sharad also had a question about connecting with other people. So I think that's something that you as a group can do, either through Facebook or through sharing email addresses or anything like that. So we'll leave that up to you as a group. So next question is Rob. So he had a couple of questions. How long to leave a draft and trusting other people in a group? Several writers said early in the course that it's a good idea to take between 2 weeks and a month away from the novel before going back to rewrite further. But during those 2 weeks to a month, should I work on short stories, another novel, read, garden? I feel it's a balance between getting enough distance to see it afresh and getting so much distance you're not into it anymore. What works best? I also would like to echo what Nidal suggests, and I think we answered this. How do you know no one in your writing group will steal or borrow your plot or ideas?
Yeah, well, you don't know for sure. So choose your friends carefully. You want to know what kind of situation you're getting into with a writing group, but I think we've talked about that a little bit before. What do you do in that time away? Again, that's going to be really specific to you as an individual. It's what keeps your mind busy and sort of keeps your conscious mind off the thing that you're trying to stay away from so that you can come back to it with fresh eyes. So is that going to be, I'm writing a fantasy series and I've written the first draft. And so to get my mind off it, I'm going to start writing the novel #2. I mean, no, that's probably not going to work for you. Just giving up on watching Netflix for 2 weeks may not be enough to kind of get your mind distracted from it either. So I would suggest if you want to carry on writing that it be a completely different sort of project. So you might go from adult fiction to I'm going to write a children's book, or I'm going to write a nonfiction article for a journal that I really admire. you might want to really change it up that way if you take your break from writing with more writing. Reading is excellent. I think reading always feeds the writer's brain. And any other kind of creative activity, again, where subconsciously you're still churning away and consciously you're doing something that might feed what you're doing, you know, in another way. So maybe you are into music, or maybe you're into crafting, or maybe, you know, whatever it is, the gardening. You know, I think all of those things can be very enriching. Help me, Andrew. What am I trying to say here? You know, I think it's a way of keeping
you're feeling
your mind occupied while your unconscious is working away on the thing that you're trying to avoid.
Yeah, I agree. And I personally like to read and engage in other art forms that have story in them, to keep my brain seeing examples of story done well.
Mm-hmm.
And reading for pleasure too, not reading necessarily purely to learn something, but just to remind myself of why I enjoy books so much.
Yep.
Yeah.
Spirit
online, actually.
Sorry?
We have an online question that I thought I would, that's connected to the second person.
Yeah.
So Christofina online asked, can fiction make occasional references to you, or is that disrupting? That's a novel that's primarily in the third person point of view. So can it slip into you? I actually have a book that does that.
I can think of one that does that. I mean, I can think of books that are written entirely in second person. I'm trying to think of something. You give your example.
So my example is a book called The Crimson Petal and the White by Michel Faber. And that's a book that has, it's a third person omniscient narrator, but the narrator has a bit of a personality, more of a personality than the sort of invisible narrator. And the narrator addresses the reader. It's a harkening back to the 19th century conventions a little bit, but it could, right at the start, it says, come into the room. Here is so-and-so, lie down beside her, right? Like it's, you know, it's definitely, you're a person who's being brought into this world. And it works. He's a really good writer, so he makes it work.
And it's suitable to the story that's being told? Like, is it a story that's set in the 19th century, or, you know?
It is. It's a story of a prostitute and the several other characters too, in London in Victorian times. And
okay, so there's a reason why it works to incorporate that kind of older form. I think in answer to Christofina, sorry, it was Christofina,
yeah.
In answer to your question, I think it's going to depend on a lot of variables. It depends why you want to do that. Is it because you are looking for that kind of, you know, that evocation of another time, in which case that might be earned? Is it because there's some information that you want to get across and you're not sure how else to do it within the confines of the POV you've chosen? Don't use it to cheat. I mean, I would say that's probably not an earned use of it, but it's really going to depend, I think. If you want to repose the question with a little bit more detail about what you're thinking of for next week, we'd be totally open to revisiting that. But I think you'd need to know a little bit more about your goal in trying to use that. We're almost at the end. We are over time, and we've got 2 more questions to get through. So let's blast on.
Okay.
Spirit Writer asks about writing rituals. If we use this deeply enriching editing course as intended, structuring our edit methodically and thoroughly, we will for sure arrive at better drafts. I can't thank everyone enough for this restart. Thank you for those kind words, Spirit Writer. That's really wonderful. However, I have a life that has so many fragmenting currents. Does anybody have rituals to recommend that help you transition out of the constant demands of life into the great and lonely writing space where the writing work happens? Andrew, do you have anything to say to that one? Do you have rituals? You sacrifice
my ritual
chickens.
is do not sacrifice a chicken. Our chickens.
Andrew keeps chickens.
I walk down the hill and I get on board a large boat and I find a desk and I put headphones on and I either leave the headphones off just so I can block out the noise around me, or I put on some instrumental music and then I write. So I get away, partly I get away from the family. And if I was here at home and I had to do some writing, I would go to a room and close the door and make it clear that that's where I'm going to be for the next hour or two. So don't bother me unless the house is burning down. It's not exactly a ritual, it's more of a habit.
You know what came to mind for me? So I was recently, for another purpose, reading this book by Stephen Pressfield. It's called The War of Art. You're probably seeing it backwards. And he describes, I'm just going to give you the very, very beginning of this, because when I read it, I thought it was hilarious. He says, I get up, take a shower, have breakfast. I read the paper, brush my teeth. If I have phone calls to make, I make them. I've got my coffee now. I put on my lucky work boots and stitch up the lucky laces that my niece Meredith gave me. I head back to my office, crank up the computer. My lucky hooded sweatshirt is draped over the chair. And the lucky charm I got from a gypsy in Sainte Marie de la Mer for only $8 in francs, and my lucky Largo name tag that came from a dream I once had. I put it on. On my thesaurus is my lucky cannon that my friend gave me. I point it towards my chair so it can fire inspiration into me. I say my prayer, which is the invocation of the muse from Homer's Odyssey, translated by T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, which another dear friend gave me, which sits near my shelf with the cufflinks that belonged to my father, and my lucky acorn from the battlefield at Thermopylae. It's about 10:30 now. Yeah, it is. He got up at 5, I bet. I sit down and plunge in. And that's how he starts writing. And when I first read that, I thought, dude, are you kidding me? If you have to, and I shouldn't make fun, because it clearly is working for him and it gets him to work right away. And that's great. However, a big part of me wants to say, do not put too many conditions and superstitions around what you need to get writing, because it's so much easier to find ways to not fulfill those than to fulfill them. I used to, when I was getting started, I needed hours of uninterrupted time. I needed to be in a completely silent room by myself. And eventually I just got it down to, okay, I need to brush my teeth. I can't write until I brush my teeth. And I think even that one has gone by the wayside. And I found that stripping away all of the conditions and the lucky charms and things it's like stripping away crutches. It's like there's no excuses. There's no excuses for not sitting down and getting going. And I think that those sorts of things can be quite dangerous. So having said that, The War of Art is a great book where he talks about dealing with procrastination, dealing with inner conflict. And although I take issue with that opening page, I think a lot of what Stephen Pressfield has to say in the book is really helpful for people who have those sorts of battles. But I would be wary of having too many elaborate rituals that allow you to not write rather than write. Okay, yeah. I'm climbing down off my soapbox now.
It's not unlike the idea of people buying fancy journals and really lovely pens and things like that. And those are, you shouldn't have anything that's too precious. Writing it's a scrappy business. I basically have a notepad in my phone, and every time I have a thought I'll stop whatever I'm doing and I'll write it down because I don't want to lose it. And that's writing.
What are you doing on your phone all the time? Now I know.
Yes, I'm actually making a character called Schmanabel.
I had that coming. We have one last question to get to.
Managing lots of characters.
Managing lots of characters in a scene. There's something that's been troubling me throughout my draft. I'm hoping you give me advice. Although my novel features only a handful of main characters, there are a number of secondary characters that fill out the cast. Family members, friends, so on and so on. My protagonist is often in settings where he's surrounded by other people, going to the beach with friends, having dinner with his parents or siblings. And I found that these scenes pose a bit of a challenge for me in terms of organizing them, particularly with dialogue. In an effort to involve every character in a scene, I usually end up making each one say or do something, which can sometimes read as if everyone is just taking turns speaking, which can come off as contrived. I've tried to make some characters exit the scene so that we don't have to worry about addressing their presence. But again, the concern is that it's coming off as contrived. He says, I don't necessarily want to cut these characters as they do still serve a purpose. And sometimes that purpose is just making my protagonist's family and social life feel realistic and full. But I feel like I'm spending too much time explaining the presence or absence of characters who aren't really at the forefront of the cast. I hope I've explained this. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. Are they overthinking it, Andrew?
Yes. I think they're overthinking it a little bit. This reminds me a little bit of some of the questions we get when someone says, I'm not sure how to move my characters from the house to work without having them get in the car and drive there and have a latte along the way and things like that. if there are a lot of characters in a scene, you need to sort of think about what's the important, why is this scene there, and who needs to actually say anything. The other people you can mention, the entire team was there. Johnny stood on a soapbox and yelled at them, right? And you don't have to have everyone in the team speaking.
That's right. And I think there's also something kind of under the surface there about acknowledging your reader's smartness. They don't need their hand held all the way through. They don't, you know, you can be in a room like you can have your character in a cocktail party surrounded by people, and, you know, we can hear fragments of talk from here and there, and you don't need to give us a formal introduction to each of those characters, show them enter the room, show them go to the bathroom, show them get their coat. You know, you can give us, you can treat it in a faster and more fragmentary way, and your reader's going to be able to keep up. Your reader's going to understand. Again, I want to give you the same advice that I gave to, I think it was Introvertica earlier, about, you know, read in the genre that you're writing in. I think you, sorry, what was the name of the person?
This is Jordan.
I think, oh, and I think I said he, and I don't know if you're a he or a she. So I think that you should go out and look for books that have large ensemble casts and watch very carefully how the author handles them. I'm thinking of, you know, there's some Michael Winker novels where he deals with dialogue in a really interesting way that's very inflected by screenplay. Sorry, Andrew, what were you saying?
I mentioned the Game of Thrones books are renowned for having huge casts.
I have not read these books, so I can't recommend or not recommend.
George R.R. Martin, Game of Thrones?
I've heard of him.
Yes.
Yes, I've heard of him. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, and in the genre that you're writing as well, but I would say find books that do that and assume that your reader is smarter than you think they are, and they will need less help than you might feel that you're having to provide at this point. And again, this is first draft stuff. If you're erring on the side of everybody gets to say something because everybody's in the room, that's okay. You can cut that later. You can work that through later. Let yourself do that for now.
Yeah, it feels also like this is a little bit like because we are so visual now, everyone's got this long history of TV and movies, is that you feel like you have to choreograph the scene like a director. Yeah. But you don't, because you're not a director, you're a writer, and you just have to focus on the areas you need to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, and there's a great quote from the Hangout. Mike McGee said, this is getting back to finding time to write. I love what Anne Lamott says on the subject. Mike says, something to the tune of, before I had kids, I couldn't write if there was a dish in the sink. Now I could write if there was a corpse in the sink. So there you go.
I'm just thinking of occasions when I think there has been a corpse in the sink. Like mice and things, yes.
Okay.
And on that note,
I think we can end on that.
I think you've gotten where we need to go. So if there's any question that we did not answer adequately, you want to repose it to us, or if you want to give us, Christofina, thinking of you, if you want to give us a little bit more sort of information about what you're thinking of so we can answer more thoroughly, please do. You're heading into week 6, which is all about agents and editors and sort of moving towards looking at the professional side of the publishing experience and what that, you know, potentially can look like and what you can be looking towards there. So a lot of material for you to consume, and it's going to seem maybe a little bit imposing because some of you may feel like you're not quite there yet. But again, store this stuff away. This course material will be available to you for the long haul, so you can always come back and revisit when you need to. Come back same time, same place next week with all of your questions and queries, and we will do our very best to answer them about working with agents and editors. I see Andrew typing. Are there last minute questions?
I was just saying thank you for a compliment. Oh. Thank you, Annabelle and Andrew. Introvertica says you cover so much.
Oh. And big thank you to Shireen as well for collating your questions and being the wonderful behind the scenes presence that she is in sunny, sunny Cairo. Hey, Shireen.
Unlike snowy West Coast BC.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's so weird. But, you know, it'll turn to rain by tomorrow, right?
Probably. Okay.
All right, everybody. Have a great writing week. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.